We are here with Mr. Stephen Bassett, Executive Director of the Paradigm Research Group, and certainly one of the most important and serious champions of the cause for ET revelation. Mr. Bassett, among all the important efforts on your part to disclose once and for all the ET presence was the one in 2011 questioning the White House about the subject. At the time, did you hope that they would honestly answer the question that you proposed?
Well, the project was called We the People, and it was set up by the White House to engage the public. It was kind of, I guess you could say, some citizen democracy. It was a good idea. And they opened a page up on the White House website for anyone to submit a petition. The rules were simple. If you get 150 signatures under your own networking, they will post it to their site. And then if you can get X number of signatures in 30 days, the White House promised that they would respond to that petition. Or give a reason why they could not respond, which was often the case for legal reasons, particularly for matters that were involved in legal proceedings. Well, guess what? The American people are starved for interaction from their government. And they received, I don't know, somewhere between 10 and 20,000 petitions in the first 30 to 45 days. The second one I think submitted was the disclosure petition by Paradigm Research Group. That's my job, to pay attention to things like that. And I recognized immediately the value of this. So we submitted a disclosure petition, which is the first of 5. And this one was straightforward. It called for the Obama administration to acknowledge the extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. Very simple. It had some explanatory material, and it was submitted. Well, it had 5,000 signatures, which was the threshold at the time, within about 6 days. The White House, I think, realized fairly quickly that they had made a mistake. They had set the threshold too low, and they realized they may have thousands of petitions to respond to. Plus, I think this disclosure petition caught them off guard. I don't think they saw it coming, though they should have.
I don't subscribe to this kind of thing, but don't you think it's strange that they changed the rules midway in the game?
Well, they indicated, to be fair to the White House, they did indicate in the explanatory material at the website that they could change the parameters. They weren't fixed. Okay. And about 4 or 5 days after we cleared the 5,000 threshold, they increased it to 25,000, a 500% increase.
Yes.
Nevertheless, our petition did qualify, and on October the 22nd, it received a response from the White House. Now, many have criticized this effort as silly because there was no chance that this petition was going to trigger disclosure with a capital D. Of course not, I knew that. And it was not likely that the response would be truthful. That's true. What was important is we got a response, and that was where history was made, because in the 65-year modern history of the UFO, really ET phenomenon, the White House had never taken a fixed position on it. And in fact, the government had gone out its way to take no positions on it, trying to absolutely minimize anything they said. Since 1969, the only response one would get would be a form letter from usually the Air Force stating that the government didn't investigate this phenomenon anymore, and whatever this thing was, it didn't investigate, it posed no threat. That was it. Because any response or any statements would be risky and could pose problems for the truth embargo. The White House was in an interesting position. It either had to say why it couldn't respond, which would have raised a lot of interest, or respond. Now, they had 2 choices in that response, which came through the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Mr. Larson, I believe, was the staffer, PhD staffer that was assigned to write it. We were quite certain that the president would have known about their response. There's no way they would have written a response to this without checking this with the White House. And they could have gone 2 ways. They could have delivered a very wishy-washy, flexible kind of statement that left plenty of room for argument that really didn't say anything. But they didn't do that. They issued an absolute hard-line, complete denial. And in this statement, which you can still see in the White House today, it's been up for 16 months. Well, no, 16 months, I take that back. It's been up for approximately 14 months.
Mm-hmm.
You can, under We the People, you go to responses, you can see the response as well as the initial petition. That's been up there all this time. By the way, these disclosure petitions and a couple of others that were submitted by other people were the first time this issue has been on the White House website itself. That was another milestone. And when you read this response, what they say is that there is no evidence at all for any life outside of the planet Earth, or evidence that any life outside the planet Earth is engaged. And then they went one step further. They said there is no evidence that the government has hidden anything from the people. Well, this was a gift. This was an early Christmas present, because that statement is not only false on all three counts, but it's indefensibly false. Now, what do I mean by that? It's possible to say something that's not true and be able to defend it quite well in the public arena. On the other hand, it's possible to say things which you simply cannot defend. Which is to say that no member of the White House staff or the head of the OSTP could stand on a stage with myself or any number of other researchers or advocates and actually defend that statement against an onslaught of evidence that would be easily provided. So what happened here? We're not clear. There's only two possibilities in my mind. One, that the White House is in fact so uninformed on the entire ET issue and its 65-year history that it actually believed that that statement would properly demonstrate the truth. Mm-hmm. Or they gave us a present.
In what sense?
Which is to say that the Obama administration, which has direct contacts back to the Rockefeller Initiative during the Clinton administration of 93 to 96, direct contacts in that, key members of the Obama circle were involved with, knew about the Rockefeller Initiative of 93 to 96 when Lawrence Rockefeller tried to get Bill Clinton to release all the files. These contacts include the current Secretary of Defense and former CIA Director Leon Panetta, the current Secretary of State through, I think, the end of January, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, who of course recently played golf with the president, John Podesta, who is the head of the Center for American Progress, was Obama's transition chair during his transition after the first election, and a former key advisor to President Clinton during the Rockefeller Initiative. By the way, Leon Panetta was the chief of staff during that time. Albert Gore, right, who was the vice president at the time. These are just some of the links that Obama administration has back to that initiative, which could have ended the truth embargo. It's inconceivable to me that either John Podesta or others did not tip off the president that the ET issue was real. That doesn't mean he was briefed. It doesn't mean he was given a CIA tour of underground facilities. It means that he was tipped off, look, it's real, we'll have to deal with it one day. Is it possible that the administration, very cleverly, we can't say anything that would attract a great deal of media on this issue, but if we were to give them a very hard-line response, it would be very easy for them to show that it was false. And one of the questions I am looking forward to asking in the post-disclosure world of somebody either in or formerly in the Obama administration is that what happened? Did you hand us a gift there? Because I assure you, we are using that gift. Sure. Everything that PRG has done since October 22nd of 2011 has been to demonstrate the clear difference between that hard-line absolute denial and the ever-mounting evidence indicating there's an extraterrestrial presence.
Back in 2001, Dr. Greer's disclosure project seemed to have opened up an important door without the credible witnesses delivering their testimony on the subject. Strongly indicating the U.S. government is really hiding what it knows about this. Mm-hmm. However, the momentum was lost when the Twin Towers were brought down. Mm-hmm. Now with your citizens' hearing on disclosure, what do you believe the reaction will be within the U.S. government? Do you think that this is going to cause an impact that's going to be sufficient to really open up something here? And what is, I'm sorry.
The question is the citizen hearing. Yes, this is the most important project that PRG has attempted. By far, nothing comes close. And it's building on the efforts of a number of other activists and researchers, not the least of which is Dr. Stephen Greer. The Disclosure Project, which continues to this day, emerged at the end of the last century and culminated, at least the initial major event, was the May 9th, 2001 press conference, which lasted for about 2 hours. It was held at the National Press Club. There were 20 witnesses on hand. There were 75 witnesses in toto that were submitted under a condensed 4-hour tape. There were about 100 journalists and camera and individuals there, including journalists and camera crews, including international teams. It was an important event. It was a good event, and it was powerful. And I am aware that it was triggering certain investigative threads among some of the news organizations. But the fact is, it takes time for a news organization, particularly high-end mainstream, to plunge into a story like that, even though there's many years of history, before they could really start to develop a proper take on it. The 9/11 events occurred, and that was it. I mean, that was the end of that thread. Since then, there have been several other press conferences held at the National Press Club. Paradigm Research Group has had a couple, 4 or 5, as well as an important press conference that was sponsored by James Fox and Leslie Kean. Another very important press conference that was sponsored by Robert Hastings and Captain Robert Salas. And all of these have helped to advance, I believe, the public awareness and tap the political media in Washington on the shoulder. Each of these conferences, again, lasted about an hour to an hour and a half, and they were over. The witnesses were powerful. What did not happen with these events and many others is what I call critical mass. In physics, critical mass is when you bring enough radioactive material together to start a chain reaction. You have to have enough in a certain space, confined at the same time, in order to create a chain reaction, and of course we know what that leads to. These events did not create such a reaction. So PRG has set out to create what we call a critical mass event, and that is the citizen hearing. It has been scheduled for April 29 to May 3. It will be held in the ballroom of the National Press Club, where these other events were also held. I think, well, actually one was held there and the other were 2 in side rooms, but all in the National Press Club. And the host hotel for this will be the Washington Plaza, about 6 blocks away. We have rented the entire ballroom for a week, including the balconies. What we're going to do is we're going to set up that ballroom to look as close as possible to a Senate hearing room with about a 300 public section, audience public section, as well as a press section, testimony tables, and of course committee tables. And for 5 days, Monday through Friday, for 8 hours a day with 2-hour breaks, between 40 and 50 of the strongest witnesses, both government and agency witnesses to events and evidence, as well as key researchers, will provide 30 hours of testimony to 5 former members of the United States House of Representatives and/or Senate. And it will all be conducted as close as possible to the protocols of an actual Senate hearing. The motto of this event is, not surprisingly, if Congress will not do its job, the people will. And this event will be held about 8 blocks from the U.S. Capitol and 2 blocks from the White House. Furthermore, this citizen hearing on disclosure, which is its name, is going to be heavily promoted by public relations experts in both Los Angeles as well as Washington, D.C. From January through April 29, every effort is going to be made to ensure that very few people in the United States and most of the developed world don't know about this event. Furthermore, it is going to be conducted with translation available simultaneous in Spanish, Portuguese, French, and possibly Russian. This is to make it possible for key witnesses who do not have command of English to be present and speak. Also, the entire testimony, all 30 hours over those 5 days, will be live streamed to the world for a modest fee, so that anyone in the world can watch this live. Though we do expect media to be covering it and maybe, broadcasting some of it live on television. But the internet provides a whole nother venue. Plus, we will have other features in that live stream, interviews, and so forth. Okay. I think you can see that this is the kind of thing that can constitute critical mass. This is so much testimony over such a long period of time, with so much awareness, that we think that the media will be taken to a place where they are forced ultimately and finally to look at the government's position and the evidence and say they do not match. And in this case, and this was intended all along, they'll be looking at the White House's hard line statement. There is no evidence of any life engaging this planet, and no evidence at all that the government has hidden anything. And then for 40 hours, Monday through Friday, at the citizen hearing, the press is going to see evidence upon evidence upon evidence that the White House position is false. And then the question is, will the media go into frenzy mode? Will it trigger the nuclear, or rather chain reaction that we want? Because when the media goes into that mode, there is no power on earth that can stop it. And they do get the information out. The trouble is they don't go into that mode often enough about the most important reasons. And so the citizen hearing, which has a website now, which is just an announcement page, citizenhearing.org. The full website will go up in very early January, and there's going to be a lot on it. At that time, the developing witnesses that are confirmed will be listed, as well as the members of the hearing committee will be listed, and a great deal more. And that is the coming event that PRG has planned for 2013.
Great. We'll certainly be following it very closely and publishing it in our webpage.
Thank you. And by the way, we have every intention of bringing a strong contingency of witnesses from South America, several countries, to present. They'll be mostly government agency people, and I'm working on that right now as I attend the 4th UFO World Fórum in UFOZ, Iguaçú. So South America will be well represented.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now on a personal level, people want to know. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you talk openly that you've never seen a UFO in your life, or an event as such. That's true, correct?
I've never had a sighting. I've obviously talked to many, I know of many sightings, and I've talked to people that have had them, and of course I'm aware of some of the most famous cases. I've never had a sighting that is really that powerful. The odd thing, perhaps, in the sky. Just haven't. And to be honest with you, I don't look at the sky that much. Perhaps a little bit more now, but I'm too busy. I don't have time to look up.
Sure. Well, but the key question for this is, what made you believe that we are really being visited by extraterrestrial life? Because most people, like myself, became believers because we have seen something that could not be explained by your everyday technology. What made you a believer on this subject?
Well, Luiz, I would make a respectful suggestion that, if you can, move away from the term believer. Believer is a term that was developed as part of the truth embargo. And of course, I'm referring in the English language.
Okay.
I'm not sure how it is in other languages, but in the English language, as a way of diminishing the efforts to get at the truth of the ET.
Like a religion.
I try to kind of equate it to a religious faith. I have faith that ETs are that type of thing. I am no more a believer in the presence of extraterrestrials than I am in the efficacy of quantum physics. Quantum physics is a highly valid theory of the world because it's been tested. There's huge evidence for it over a period of 100 years. The thing with the ET issue is this. The evidence for the extraterrestrial presence is massive and overwhelming. And the only reason it isn't fully acknowledged is the government made a conscious decision that it would withhold acknowledgement and thwart attempts to, resolve this issue, which it did for political reasons. The governments have done this in the past in many areas. Any government can decide at any time it wants to thwart the study of a field. The Soviet Union did it. The Germans, Nazis did it. They just interfere and say, you can't study that, or whatever you found out isn't true. This has happened before, and in this case, it's with respect to the extraterrestrials. By the time I was 20, I was sort of orientated in math and science. I eventually got a degree in physics. Just from what I was reading in the public media and an odd book, impressed me enough to think, well, clearly the only explanation is extraterrestrial. By the time I made the decision to get into the field in 1995, I had read and seen more than enough to know absolutely it is definitely the case. The evidence clearly shows
Just
that.
by the evidence,
And in the 16 years since, all that's happened is that I have experienced even more evidence. And so I believe that the evidence is overwhelming, and that if presented in a proper form without bias and without interference by government, it would convince any reasonable person.
Since we are at a personal level here, it's not any more business. This is very candid, actually. Now, Dr. Greer firmly states that these extraterrestrial, this presence, is not harmful to the human beings. However, there are other people who say that's not true. What's your personal opinion about this? I know you never touched this, but that's why I'm asking you.
I occasionally am asked, and I will respond, but the reality is, because of the government's interference in the research and investigation of this phenomena and the suppression of the issue, the truth embargo, in other words, we are at a disadvantage. We're not in a position, the citizen science movement is not in a position to say with extreme confidence, high confidence, what the totality of the alien picture is, what their agenda is, how many civilizations are here, what do they want, where is it going. We can't. We can create models from what we do know, connect dots as best we can, but absent a full-blown societal confrontation or engagement of the issue, the information is incomplete. And that makes for a somewhat messy situation. And so there are countless theories within the UFO ET research activist community about what's going on, what's not going on. All of them deserve a certain amount of respect.
But there are theories.
Except those that are, clearly, obviously disinformation or silliness. There are those that have a very strong feeling that the entire extraterrestrial engagement of the human race is benign, helpful, beneficial, positive. There are those that see some very negative aspects to it and question the agenda of one or more of these alien groups. I think both positions have support. However, I think taking a hard position in either case is probably premature. I think right now you just want to assess the evidence as we best know it. In other words, those things that we see taking place regarding ET engagement, such as crop circles, seem to be very benign. Those things which we are very much aware of, in which individuals are taken without their consent and dealt with in somewhat complex ways, including intrusive medical examinations, do not seem to be so benign. And that's probably what we know. So I think what I try to do is whenever I'm talking in terms of a model, a working model, which you have to have. I mean, you just can't get up every day and approach the whole business like it's a random set of numbers. But when I'm talking about a model, I say that. It's a model. It could be changed at any time. But it's my best assessment of what is going on. So I just caution people to understand that mostly we're dealing in theories. There are certain fundamental facts that I think cannot be challenged successfully. One is there an extraterrestrial presence, non-human presence from elsewhere? Almost certainly from another star system or star systems. Very, very unlikely, but possible from out of time or out of dimension. Our present dimensions, I consider that very small. That's a fact. That the government knows about this presence, absolute fact. That the government has deliberately withheld information and suppressed research, or at least acknowledgement, absolute fact. And that human beings are being directly engaged in a physical way by these entities, absolute fact. Beyond those four, things start to get less certain. Though certain specific things like the event at Roswell, I think is a fact. But there's a whole lot of uncertainties now that are mixed in after you get after the basic facts. And what you have to do as a researcher and advocate is assign a certain best estimate probability to them. And so if you're confronted by a theory or an assertion or a film and you examine it and your best estimate is that's got about a 5% chance of being valid, then you got to stick it off to the side. if it's got about a 90%, 85% challenge, and you need to sort of put it into your bell curve of evidence that you're working with. That's about the best we can do right now in the pre-disclosure era.
Okay. Do you believe that the ET disclosure will rip the fabric of human culture, as many people are saying?
Again, the effect of disclosure is unknown. We can only guess. There are many people who have very little understanding of the ET phenomenon, the evidence, or the history, who are making strong statements about what will happen post-disclosure. Obviously, that's being made with a somewhat uninformed opinion. It's an uninformed opinion. Mm-hmm. Those that have studied and know have a sense of what is likely to come out, the information that's likely to come forward, are also not in agreement. And there are some in the ET activist community, research activist community, that have great concern about the post-disclosure reality, which is starts the moment after the formal announcement is made by a major country, probably the United States. I can only speak for my view. I do not think that disclosure is going to rip the fabric of society. I do not think it's going to destroy religion, or that it's going to destroy financial structures. I don't think people are going to go crazy. I don't think countries will fall. I think the rich will remain rich and the poor will remain poor. But change will start to emanate from that moment in a ripple effect that will go on for the rest of time. Mm-hmm. And that change will in some cases be very subtle. In some cases it'll be a little more dramatic. But in the same sense, the day after disclosure, everybody gets up with the same problems and the same issues they faced the day before. And so one way I like to posit it, somewhat Zen-like, is that after disclosure, everything will change and nothing will change. The human race has been adapting to change for, well, millions of years, if you go back to proto-Homo sapiens, and for a good 300,000 years as Homo sapiens sapiens. Adapting to change is what we do best. That's why we're still here. This change is no different. But unlike some of the things that we've had to face as a species, this change has embedded in it so many positives, so many extraordinary possibilities, that I think that overall, the human race will quickly ascertain that, well, there's some awkwardness here, there's some issues, there's some concerns, but boy, are we excited. So I have a very positive feeling about the post-disclosure world. Now, understand, there's a lot of bad things going on in this pre-disclosure world that could still happen in the post-disclosure world. Sure. Bombs could go off, wars could take place, any number of typically old paradigm human operating system 1.0 behavior could take place. On the other hand, in my presentations, I like to make the case that disclosure might actually change that equation. That we may see a new worldview emerge, a new human operating system, and we may see less of the kind of behavior that has led us to where we are today in the last month of 2012. A behavior and a pattern that really only leads to one place if it's allowed to continue unabated, and that is a nuclear explosion. And I use that as a metaphor.
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
So I'm pretty optimistic, by and large, of disclosure and its aftermath. But I will say this, without question, and it will vary from person to person, but everybody is going to find some things happening in the post-disclosure world that's going to excite them, energize them. They're also going to find some things that disturb them greatly, and they just need to accept that.
Perhaps the end of the oil industry is one of them.
Well, the oil industry is going to end eventually anyway.
It will, yes. Certainly.
It may end a little sooner, but again, don't worry about the oil executives and shareholders. They're still going to be quite fine.
Certainly.
They'll move their monies into other new developing energy technologies, and they'll be as rich as they ever were.
Sure. How close do you think we are, after all the efforts done by you and other people like you, from an actual opening of all of this reality?
The question is often asked, when will disclosure take place? How close is it? It's a tough thing to answer. The best analogy that I give is a lot of people were asking, when will the Soviet Union collapse? They were asking that in the 70s and the 80s. It seemed to them that the system couldn't last. It was fundamentally flawed at every level. And it was fundamentally flawed, and it couldn't last. But when was it going to end? They had massive surveillance of their people. They had an army that was under the control of course, the government. They had control of the press, the media, and so forth. And they were not shy about inflicting severe punishment on those that challenged the state.
So you think it was a worse situation than it is today regarding
I would, well,
the
the Soviet Union's ability to continue their state was far more powerful and broad than what the U.S. government has had to maintain the ET truth embargo, by far. And the Soviet Union was able to last for 73 years. But when was it going to end? Well, how do you know? When? It was very difficult. You could see the signs. You could see the erosion of state authority. You could see the listlessness of the people. And when it finally did collapse fairly quickly, even the CIA acknowledged that it kind of surprised them. They didn't see it that soon. It's very much the same with this truth embargo. I will say this, that the door doesn't really open. It's not even, I think, a possibility, a significant possibility, until the Cold War's ended. Once the Cold War ends, it's a whole new ball game, as we say in the United States. That doesn't mean it was going to happen right away. It's not a trivial thing, ending this truth embargo. But it could have happened. It could have happened during the Clinton administration had they responded to the Rockefeller Initiative in an outgoing, positive way. But Clinton's hands were tied, and a lot of things have happened over the last 20 years that I can draw upon to explain why disclosure hasn't happened. But I will say this: by the year 2000, the truth embargo was in serious trouble, and that from 2000 on, and I'll kind of use the Cometa report that was issued by France as a milestone. Right? From the point that report is issued, going for the next 12 years, including the release of documents by the UK and France and Brazil and Australia and Canada, New Zealand and Uruguay and Sweden, that these release of tens of thousands of documents, which was a message to the US government that these other countries were weary of this truth embargo, as well as the mass of further evidence. The truth embargo has been hanging like by a thread, like a ripe apple on a tree, up beyond your reach, swaying in the breeze, and you're looking at it and wondering, when is that ripe apple going to fall? And so as far as I'm concerned, particularly going back to the last 4 or 5 years, the truth embargo could end at any time. In other words, you could wake up at one morning and learn that there's a press conference announced for later that day. It'll be a Friday, it'll be late in the day, 5 o'clock, 5:30, maybe 7 o'clock. And lo and behold, that's what will happen. However, that's not a guarantee. And there are events that could prevent it. A major war, a nuclear attack in the United States, any number of things would seize the attention of governments, and the willingness of any government to step forward on this issue in the midst of that would be erased. And so, there are a number of things that could put disclosure off. But barring something dramatic like that, the truth embargo is on its last legs. The whole purpose of the citizen hearing is, in fact, to create critical mass and end it next year. In other words, the goal of this citizen hearing is not small. It is, in fact, to create a critical mass event that will trigger a media reaction that will result in the truth embargo ending within 60 or 90 days. Am I guaranteeing it? Absolutely not. But is it structured to do that? Yes. Could it do that? Absolutely. And most importantly, thanks to the support that PRG received to fund this event, which is over $1 million.
All private funds?
Private funds. Which will be, and we will announce the backing of this after the first of the year.
Okay.
But the event is announced. The National Press Club is reserved and paid for. The hotel reserved and paid for. This event has been announced, it's out there, it's going to happen. And that's important, because even if something particularly awful happens between now and April 29, it will not prevent a citizen hearing from taking place, and therefore the potential for that event to end this truth embargo is there. Had something very unpleasant happen prior to getting this event out there and announced and funded, it would have been a different matter. Mm-hmm. So we're extremely pleased that we've been able to do this, and that we'll be able to hold this event so soon in the second term of the Obama administration. Because as I pointed out, President Obama is the preferential winner of that election. last November 2012. Because he has all of these ties through key people in the Democratic Party and his administration back to the Rockefeller Initiative. And therefore he has a legacy that he can build on to be the disclosure president, assuming that another nation doesn't preempt him. There are a number of nations that the leader of that nation could go in front of their citizens tomorrow based upon what evidence they have from their Air Force Defense Chase planes, filming these craft coming and going, whatever else they have in their files, and announce the ET presence. And that would be it. And the U.S. would have to follow that nation. And I should say, quite candidly, that Brazil is one of the nations on the list that I consider potential disclosure nation that could make this announcement itself.
Okay. We had sort of a heartbreaker yesterday. The first day of this forum here, Gevard announced that the Air Force, the Brazilian Air Force, was the only branch of the Brazilian military to cooperate with this cause by releasing many documents. I'm sure you're aware of this. And actually, we had a representative of the Brazilian Air Force here to hand over the documents again and just look at that. But the very next day, we had one lecturer who was a son of a pilot in the Air Force. And this pilot had access to many files that this kid, this lecturer as a kid, had the access to the files.
Right.
And he said that he saw many, many documents in a box that he actually saw. And he even saw pictures of ships that were taken by the pilots, nearby airplanes as they were flying. And none of these were included in the documents released by the Air Force. Of course, this is not a surprise, but what are your comments about this?
It's okay. Each government is engaging the issue within the parameters that they can engage it. There are limits to how far they want to go. If any government, whether it's Brazil or France or the United Kingdom, is not yet prepared to pop the cork on the bottle of Roswell Champagne 1947, if they don't want to trigger disclosure, they can only go so far, and that's as far as they'll go. And so, are the governments that are releasing files like UK, France, and Brazil and others releasing everything? Of course not. It's okay. The point is they're releasing files. There are many boxes of files around the world in attics of former members of the military, in boxes underneath people's beds, as well as files in the government. It's all right. There is more than enough evidence to confirm the presence.
Sure.
And we actually don't need one more document, one more letter, one more photograph. We already have all the proof we need. All we need is for the press to look at the proof that we have. We don't have to keep proving this over and over and over again. And so, if those files on the negative side, those rather perhaps groundbreaking files were not released. On the positive side, well, we know that they may still have them, and so they could be released at any time.
Or lost, or they have lost them.
Well, I'm sure many files have been lost.
Like NASA lost the moon films.
Supposedly.
Supposedly.
You know, when it comes to history like this, we're talking about history at an extraordinary level.
It's like a big joke, isn't it?
I believe there's a huge reluctance on anybody to lose anything. So don't be surprised that a lot of lost stuff ends up turning up. If I had historic photos confirming an ET presence, it would be very difficult to stick those in a shredder. However, telling people that things are lost is a simple way of getting out from under the media scrutiny. Just like Dennis Kucinich, Congressman Kucinich, was told by the Army that they lost all the phone records in and out of Roswell during that particular period. Rather conveniently.
Of course.
Would I be shocked if all those phone records turn up post-disclosure? Of course not.
About the moon, since we touched the subject, a lot of people, you see that on the internet all the time. They say that the first astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, actually saw something on the moon. All the information I have is what I find on the internet, Do you have anything that might give some support to that alleged fact?
I have no evidence. I have no information regarding the relationship between astronauts and the ET issue beyond what's already out there and so forth. I can only say this, that one, I have almost unmeasurable respect for the astronauts that served in the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo programs. These are as fine a human beings as America has certainly produced. And of course now we have other nationalities that have gone into space. Whatever they say, I am going to take as fact. Whatever they say, as far as until I learn otherwise, I will take as fact. I am also aware, however, that NASA is fully obligated under the law to the Department of Defense with respect to the ET issue. There is no way that anyone in NASA could say anything publicly regarding the ET issue without authority from NASA that would not be breaking the law and probably agreements and Lord knows what else. They are completely contained on this issue, which quite simply means that an astronaut could see a mile-wide saucer hovering over the moon, and that astronaut would be under enormous restrictions to say absolutely nothing. And that's just the way it is. Does that mean the astronaut saw anything? I don't know. But if they did, could they have talked about it publicly? Not under the law. And so that's all that I can say at this point. But until I know otherwise, whatever an astronaut says about what they saw, did, know, that's fact for me until I have clear evidence. Otherwise, or they issue a changed statement.
Okay. Again, I going back to Kennedy here. I don't subscribe to these kinds of theories, but here we go. The Kennedy assassination, a lot of people say that it was due to the fact that he was going to disclose the ET presence. Is there any real indication that you have seen about that?
The issue of what the connection between Kennedy and ETs really comes under a larger heading, and that is the reinterpretation of history. A lot of historians and a lot of very smart people are going to spend most of the rest of this century going back and completely re-examining the history of the world, the history of the United States and other countries and the world in general, certainly back to the civilization of Sumer about 8,000 years ago, with the ET reality, with the ET matter as fact, and looking for every possible connection between what has happened in the past and an ET reality, and they're going to find a lot. The connection to Kennedy is just one of countless examples of that. Is there a Kennedy-ET connection? The evidence seems to point that there is. Truman certainly knew about the ET presence. Eisenhower certainly knew about the ET presence. Kennedy was not an unconnected man. His father was very powerful. He was a war hero. He was hardly, disrespected by the military. And so the idea that Kennedy would not have been tipped off by someone that the ET presence is real, I find to be quite unlikely. Whether he was given an extensive briefing by the CIA or the Department of Defense, I don't know. By 1960, the truth embargo was solidifying. And the government was getting very good at manipulating the issue and keeping the public out of it. And it may be by that point they realized that giving the president a briefing might very well risk the truth embargo. Why not put the president on a need-to-know basis? So in that sense, Kennedy was kind of a transition president. But there is some evidence that Nixon knew about it, may have even had access to bodies. And so the idea that Kennedy wouldn't have been given some strong access and Nixon would. But again, do we know for sure? We do not. Now, people that are angry at our financial institutions and want to reform them and are also opposed to the Federal Reserve find in the Kennedy assassination evidence there that his efforts at currency reform was it. People that have great knowledge about the Cuban invasions, the Bay of Pigs, find evidence there. People that know a great deal about Kennedy's connection to the mob, which unfortunately he had, find it there. He was a complicated man with a complicated life. We may never know the exact reasons why the man was assassinated. I'm hoping we just find out who authorized it and who the actual players were, but that's doubtful as well.
Yeah, still
but it pleases me that the ET research is deep enough and broad enough that it has found those connections and is finding connections elsewhere. It's doing its job. Those that jump to conclusions based on that research, well, that can be problematic. But I understand why people do that. It's most importantly, we do know about some of these connections, and we keep looking because there'll be more to learn. And one day, hopefully, we'll know the true story there as to whether there was any connection between the decision by the conspirators to murder the president and his decisions, potential policies on the extraterrestrial issue.
You think the issue is sensitive enough to justify the death of a president?
In 1960 it was.
Yeah.
It was a national security matter. I mean, the national security people that are charged with our defense. And we're not talking about a bunch of criminals or evil people. We're talking about people that are charged with our defense. They, by 1960, their job was to defend us against the Soviet Union and prevent a nuclear war, which ends all civilization. That was a pretty serious matter. And so I can assure you, if something done by anybody threatened the balance that they had created that might risk nuclear war, any measure would have been considered to prevent that individual from doing that, right? Not because they were evil, not because they wanted to be rich and powerful, but because their job was to deal with the Soviet threat, which by 1960 was pretty obvious. And of course, we know what happened in 1962. We nearly had a nuclear war. And so their attitude would be, what if at the same time we were dealing with missiles being shipped over to Cuba by Khrushchev, and at the same time it's all over the place that extraterrestrials are here, and we're having to deal with that too. In that kind of confusion, somebody makes a mistake. And that's why PRG has gone to considerable lengths since the late 1990s to try to change the language, particularly with respect to the UFO cover-up. I do not refer to a cover-up. I refer to a truth embargo because it wasn't illegal. The fundamental policy of repressing and acknowledgement of the ET issue was done under the national security laws. It was completely illegal. No one was ever going to get charged with a crime, at least for the basic policy. And to call it a cover-up essentially made something illegal it wasn't. And then it thus criminalizes the people that pursued that policy, going all the way back to the Truman administration. And so that's just not right. And criminalizing people that were defending the country in a sense is not going to get you allies inside the government. And so it's a truth embargo, not a cover-up.
Okay. We have with us a famous Italian ufologist. His name is Roberto Pinotti. And I was talking to him just now. Tomorrow he's going to announce at the end, he's going to propose that all the countries unite forces to fight together or to try to open this veil of secrecy that is on top of us right now. Do you think this is something easy to orchestrate? It's something that it's going to work?
Easy to orchestrate an absolute world-changing, unprecedented event in the history of humankind? Probably not easy. But I'm interested that you told me this, because as it happens, and this is purely coincidental, in my presentation on Sunday.
Pode check it. Pode check.
In my presentation on Sunday, which is just before Roberto Pinotti speaks,
Good that I told you.
I am going to make a suggestion that countries within the developed world, certainly, though any country is invited, consider the possibility of meeting privately behind the scenes to possibly effect a joint disclosure announcement on July the 8th, 2013. July the 8th is World Disclosure Day. I know this because PRG established World Disclosure Day 2 years ago. Another attempt had been made previously, but it didn't quite take. PRG put its resources behind it, and July the 8th is World Disclosure Day. Go see worlddisclosureday.org, I think, or worlddisclosureday.net. I think it's .org. And it's a day to acknowledge the disclosure movement, the need for this event to take place, and to know the truth about the ET presence. And it's about 3 months after the end of the citizen hearing, which will end on May the 3rd. So July. It's 2 months, just 2 months afterwards. Enough time for the media to maybe engage this issue. And so to me, it's perfect timing for some nations to say, okay, that's the day we're going to do it. Now, I'm not suggesting they're going to put out press releases on this. They're not going to do that and say, well, you know, on July the 8th, we're going to announce the ET presence. No, that's not going to happen. They'll work behind the scenes, they'll come to an understanding, and then they'll just do it, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to invite the great nation of Brazil, which recently became the 6th largest economy in the world, passing France, who's had enormous success in addressing some of the problems that the world is facing within their own country, and clearly is a new progressive nation, that perhaps you take the lead in setting up some of these meetings.
Wonderful.
So that on July the 8th, we get disclosure even if the United States is not ready. And I will be making that proposal in my presentation on December the 9th in Foz de Iguaçu on my birthday, as it happens.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I'll be here to congratulate you for your birthday. And, well, I heard it firsthand. That's an honor. Well, Mr. Bassett, I don't want to take
pretty much
more of your time.
Is there something else particularly you want to ask?
No, we could go the entire day, but I
think
just
you have
want
enough
you to,
for your blog?
Certainly, I want you to give us some last comments or considerations here.
Well, I would like to say, since I'm in Brazil at this meeting and being interviewed by a Brazilian journalist blogger, that one, it's time for South America to assert itself in this global issue. The ET presence is here, not to engage Missouri or Washington or the Democrats or the Republicans or this race or that race. I can assure you the ETs are engaging the entire planet. That's all continents, all people, all races, all religions. And it's very obvious that South America, over the last 10 years particularly, has been making a concerted effort to develop a much more independent and autonomous position in the world, out from under undue influences by the United States and Europe, to assert itself, assert its hegemony. And this is a good thing. And one of the ways it can do that would be to further take the lead in the advancement of the disclosure process and the disclosure advocacy movement. Now, it's already doing this. Witnesses, government agency witnesses from a number of countries are coming forward. Clearly, the governments of those countries are not coming down on these people. They are allowing them to do this. They're not preventing it, as near as I can tell. There's a lot of research down here that's getting more attention, and I will include South America. I will include Central America as well, and the Caribbean. There are things happening in Mexico certainly. But with respect to South America has a golden opportunity here to take the lead in one of the most important issues in human history, which I think will be good for the continent and the nations down here, which in my view have been inappropriately neglected by Western media and unfortunately exploited by Western nations. That I think is coming to an end. We are emerging in a new, obviously, a new millennium, and worldviews are going to be changing and extraordinary events are going to be happening, and every nation on every continent should be as engaged as possible in this extraordinary transition that's taking place, so that they're going to be able to participate in redesigning, rebuilding our world into a sustainable world of sustainable societies, working within a biosphere that's not being destroyed, working with each other, getting away from war as a means of diplomacy, and creating a viable planet for all species, not including the human race. All this could happen very soon. And so I'm glad to be in South America. I'm glad to be in Brazil. I hope to come back. And I'm very proud of the research and activism that's taking place here, not the least of which, of course, is that by A.J. Gavard, who is one of the hardest working researcher, activist, and publisher in this field anywhere in the world.
Okay, it was a great pleasure having you with us, and thank you very much for your...
I look forward to seeing it on your blog. Make sure that you
thank you very much. I will.
Edited versions.
It will, certainly will. I will.